Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the 8 p.m. Debrief Cookout. You're joined by your usual co-host, the sensational F1 Black, and the MDM, the modern day Morgan Freeman, aka AMG Dance. And what a historic week it's been in just motorsport generally, with Lewis Hamilton making it 5 and 5 podiums, George Russell securing his first career pole with Mercedes, Black's boy Alexander Rossi winning his first race in 3 years in IndyCar at the Indianapolis road course. And then my boy, Raffaello Marcello, winning the crown jewel of them all at the GT3 racing, becoming the king of Spa in the Spa 24-hour endurance race. And I know for him it's a huge aspiration and a goal he always wanted to achieve. So it was really phenomenal to see him add that accomplishment of a many ever-growing list of achievements. But Black, we haven't even got into it. Ferrari strategy is still stuck in the mud, or should I say stuck in the quicksand. The curious case of Max Verstappen, the Pied Piper, and the Orange Racist Rats. Seb retiring from F1, and Alonso's El Aston plan coming into effect. Michael Massey in FIA witness protection, double DRS gate, and then Alex Palou with another, well, not even another, it's the lawsuit, the ever pending lawsuit that's now officially been filed by Chip Ganassi Racing, and much more. So before we get into this week's topics, I'd just like to make a special announcement. A great friend of the show and supporter and contributor, Asaf Saji, make sure you follow him on Twitter, has given me something really awesome to give away to you guys in the comments. And just stay tuned for future episodes as we decide how we're going to give it away throughout the course of the summer break for F1. But Black, man, it's been an interesting week and a lot of things to go through as well.
Yeah, it's been incredible. You mentioned Alexander Rossi getting his first IndyCar win. That was probably my, number two highlight of the weekend, only slightly eclipsed by Lewis Hamilton again, basically putting in a winning performance, if not for a bit of bad luck. But yeah, it feels like at the start of the season, we were wondering in Formula One if, these cars could race, whether there'd be an improvement. If you look at the top six, I think it is, they're all within 18 seconds, which at the end of a race distance of 70 laps is impressive. So a lot to break down. I think those that have listened to the first couple of episodes will know that Ferrari are, in for a bit of a beating tonight, but I think much deserved. And yeah, a whole load of topics as we enter silly season and get one more episode in before we take that summer break.
Uh,
I mean, where do you want to start, Mr. Dens?
well, man, we've got the agenda list, so I'll let you kind of
Yeah.
segue them, and then I'll be happy to alley-oop them.
Well, then, in which case, look, let me be completely selfish and head straight to Ferrari. So, first of all, Max Verstappen winning from 10th place, spinning and still winning shows, in my view, that in terms of the package, that Red Bull car is absolutely a force to be reckoned with. Ironically, there were some people on Twitter trying to compare it to Lewis Hamilton's drive in Interlagos last season. I think we'll treat that with the contempt it deserves by moving swiftly on. Completely mad comparison. But perhaps the biggest talking point of the weekend, it wasn't the Brit-Sadies podium. Absolutely not. It wasn't Ocon's outrageous defense of Alonso, although we'll on the start-finish straight, and we'll get to that a bit later, I think. It was Ferrari yet again committing another atrocious strategy blunder. And this came when I mentioned the Alpines. There'd been a few cars going on to hard tyres, and for some reason, Ferrari decided, you know what, we're basically leading the race. We've got a decent lead, or at least for the race for Hungary, a decent lead. Max Verstappen's come into the pit stop. He looks like he's going to do the undercut on Sainz. Do we bring Sainz in? No, let's not bring Sainz in. I'll tell you what we should do. We should bring a guy with fresher tyres in and put hard tyres on that don't seem to work. So we'll get to the kind of race result in a second, and irrefutable proof that Ferrari doing this literally cost them the race win. But Dens, tell me this. is there any doubt that this was a kind of complete blunder from Ferrari? Have you got any sympathy for them, or are you joining me in the kitchen, turning up the grill?
Black, absolutely not. The referees put the howler in 4K on the big screen, and VAR came back and returned and announced that was an absolute stinker. And it's week in, week out. And if the listeners remember us saying last week, like we said this week had to be the one where Ferrari needed to secure that race win, because obviously they had just started the charge, probably back in Silverstone with Sainz. Then they had gone 2 for 2 at the Red Bull Ring, with Leclerc, and even that victory wasn't without its last minute dramas with the throttle pedal. And then obviously we get to Paul Ricard. They do all the hard work on a Saturday. They lead the race only for Red Bull to undercut them. Don't react to the undercut. Puts Charles into panic mode. Then the inevitable scream of hell arrives. So, our analysis and how we came to the conclusion we've come to is that Ferrari needed to have a better weekend. They were going to a track which favored their package more, as it's a low speed circuit with a high downforce emphasis out of slow speed corners. Every single variable that you could wish ever could go in their favor was given to them, with Max qualifying in P10, Lewis having the DRS failure in qualifying, and even Charles being able to actually make the overtake on George Russell work with the medium over the soft delta. But again, Black, they just cannot put 2 and 2 together and make it equal 4 for the life of the Ferrari mechanics. It's really concerning because, as you mentioned correctly, it's time for people to make the pit stops. Ferrari had the advantage of looking at other teams such as Alpine go onto those hard tires, and everybody, it was very abundantly clear to see from that particular point of the race that the hard tire wasn't the optimal tire to be running on, considering the cooler conditions and the higher warm-up requirements of those to get them in the performance window. And again, they completely didn't take the sign and they went onto the hard tires. And I'll just say, just for those at home as well, to add context, the hard tires, like when I play on a F1 2022 on the video game with the hard tires, they're not even hard. They're harder than hard. I call them the rock tires. I call them the tombstones, because those tires are hard as hell and they offer you no grip beyond like a certain temperature level. So it was absolutely ludicrous that they put Charles in that predicament. And obviously, no matter what Charles did, it just made the howler worse, because you then started to get like an influx of rain showers and stuff like that coming forward as well. Then I don't know how it was that Charles was clearly the driver with most pace. What Ferrari ended up with a P4 and P6 retrospectively as well in relation to that, which is nuts. And then another thing I'm going to throw back to you, Black, was just the nonchalance of the howler, because at the end of the race, Bonotto was, very, very, eagerly interviewed by a lot of the pundits. And, his body language was one of calm, which I could understand from a sense of you don't want people to see that it's burning you on the inside. But to me, just like in terms of the strategy of Ferrari, it's very abundantly clear they're not the races this season, Black. And, this is maybe a team that hasn't been at the sharp end of the grid in a championship battle for quite a long time, and it's showing and reflecting that in every single performance we see most weeks. And it's gonna only get tougher from here as well, I'd say, like, because if you look at it, Charles's and Sainz's body language at the end of the race was completely one of dejection. You could just see how like annoyed and frustrated they'd become with some of the decisions the team have made and the predicaments they were put in. And heading into the summer break and looking onwards to what will happen when we come back, it's only going to get harder for them, because Red Bull are going to look for ways to, win the development race, even with their spicy floor on the heavy technical directives. And obviously the Mercedes pairing seem to get stronger and stronger week in and week out in as well. So it's not looking good. It's not looking good at all. And I know that we said that they were stuck in the mud, but now it just looks like they're stuck in quicksand.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to work out why I care so much about this. Maybe I'm just selfish and I don't want to see Max gifted a second title, but it feels like that's basically where they are. So I think that the championship lead for Max is now 80 points. I think someone worked out that if Lewis wins every single race from here until the end, and Max comes third in every race until here in the end, Max still wins the title by 10 points. So
Wow.
basically, our main hope, unless this, compliance with the floor regulations really shifts the order, our main hope is Leclerc and Ferrari, at least putting up some sort of a fight. So a few things. You mentioned Binotto. So he said, we believe Hards could have been fast enough to somehow keep us in the race. So first of all, he's saying somehow as if the car wasn't quick enough. Do you see that? How he said? And then he says, overall, they didn't work as we were expecting. And I think that's because the car wasn't working as we were expecting. It's like, no, you literally look at the race pace. You literally had the fastest car. And here's the irrefutable proof, right? So here's the race results. So Max Verstappen crossed the line 1 hour 35 minutes and 39 minutes 35 seconds. Lewis Hamilton 7 or 8 seconds behind. George Russell 12 in total behind, right? And then you get Carlos Sainz 14 seconds behind, Sergio Perez 15 seconds behind, and then Leclerc 16 seconds behind. Now, what you've got to remember is that Leclerc pitted for Hards on fresher tyres than Sainz had at that point. So they both made their stop. Sainz had, older tyres at that stage. They brought Leclerc in onto Hards, and then they brought Leclerc in again towards the end of the race back onto soft. So we know that a pit stop in Hungary cost you at least 16 seconds. And where did he finish? 16 seconds off the lead. You add in the race time lost from trundling around on tombstones, which is I love that phrase. It's irrefutably he's been cost a race result. I mean, the final thing I'll say before I kind of hand back to you on this is Sky Sports, who are usually like mild mannered and don't kind of pull together these sorts of narratives, even they're adding up the points that the Ferrari have cost Leclerc this season. So let's remember in Monaco, where Leclerc was leading, and then they said box, and then he ended up basically boxing behind Sainz, and then and ended up finishing fourth. Then forget the engine failures, of which there have been at least 2 on Leclerc's car, and then the subsequent penalties for having new engines. You forget the British Grand Prix. Leclerc and Sainz were running pretty close together. Leclerc was, in the lead, and they said, "Oh, you stay out." Sainz came in, got some fresh tires, safety car restart. Leclerc dropped back, and he lost points. And now again, we've talked about the French Grand Prix and Leclerc making an error, but he was having to rag the car around the corner because he'd been undercut and they were keeping him out for some reason. So Ferrari. Again, I said this last time. If I really supported Ferrari, I would feel even more exhausted than I already do watching them conspire to throw away what should have been, a relatively easy title. Here's my question to you, Dans. If you put, Lewis Hamilton in that car, or if you give that car to any other team in terms of the pit wall, do you think that they're going to, do you think they'd be on neck and neck with Max? Do you think they'd have a chance to win, or do you buy into the Binotto spin that, somehow the car wasn't good enough? What do you think on that?
I think it's definitely the former and not the latter there, Black, because we made this point, consistently over the last couple of episodes. You can get the answer you're looking for even from an ex-Ferrari man himself, Luca de Montezemolo, the ex-president, CEO of Ferrari, which said if Lewis Hamilton drove Ferrari during the Seb Vettel era, he would have won championships for us, which goes to show you that there's some disconnect between the driver and the team, and you need everybody singing from the same hymn sheet when you're at church. In the same way, you need that logic to apply, with Ferrari too. We've had a race engineer come on previously. That episode hasn't been dropped just yet, but he, correctly pointed out that there is something not quite right with, how the decisions are made, how the calculations are made. And also, I think another thing, you bring in Lewis into this as well. This is what makes Lewis a superstar driver, because it's not a case of having the tools. It's a case of having the tools and getting the job done. And people use that lazy narrative. Oh, well, Lewis only won 7 world championships because he was in the fastest car. So, and even if he wasn't the fastest car, Charles Leclerc is in one of the fastest cars this season. And, through driver error, through reliability, through team strategy, which is the more abundant one, They can't put like a string of results together. So that whole argument is completely flawed. You know, if you're then gonna say it's all the car and not the driver. Because at the end of the day, last time I checked, like it's the driver that drives the car, not the other way around. You know, I'm sure as much as Elon Musk would love an entry into F1, the self-driving F1 cars haven't quite made it to the grid yet. So you know, it's this bizarre to me, and that's one other. As much as I love Charles, I don't want people to see this as me bashing him or Ferrari because I have a lot of respect for the brand. I obviously grew up watching Ferrari and admiring them as a kid during the Schumacher era. Wouldn't wish to do that, but when you look at it like in this way as well, I also think one of the more not big issues, but one of the other like probably cons of Charles Leclerc, maybe you could argue, is that maybe he's too reliant on Ferrari, you know, because anytime I've seen him and Carlos, sorry, go head to head, have you noticed it's always Carlos that's the one going against the team? It's always Carlos saying, no, 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 no. You're not gonna box me for intermediate tires within a couple of laps time. It's gonna be dry enough for slicks. No, 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 no. You're not gonna make me hold up Lewis Hamilton when I can basically beat my teammate with half a front wing dangling downside, you know, and get my, you know, inaugural like race win. Whereas with Charles, I feel that there is that kind of reliance on the team to work everything out. And maybe because like he's so, you know, infixed with, you know, trying to outdrive this car to get the most out of it. It's that 10-20% of capacity that, you know, a Lewis, a Michael, even Carlos, you've seen it on occasions as well. They can think behind the wheel and makes, you know, really complicated, you know, mathematical decisions on the fly and have the capacity to relay back to the team to make reasoned decisions on the spot under pressure, you know. So I think that's also a thing that I don't know if Charles will get with time. I don't know if it's always a thing where he's just going to be relying on the team to basically do their job and he just does his job, which is driving the car. But what makes a great driver into a legendary driver, an iconic driver, you know, a historic driver is one that can basically amalgamate all those skills.
I mean, look, they're going to call me a sort of butthurt Lewis Hamilton fan, but do you remember earlier in Lewis's career when he and Jenson Button were teammates, and there was this narrative, oh, Button's so smart, so clever on the strategy, and there was, I think it was the Canadian Grand Prix where Button put Hamilton in the wall, and admittedly, Button then came back and won the race, having took a penalty. I do think though that there is something to to say about experience, giving someone like Lewis the ability to read a race or to remain calm enough to read a race even in the worst circumstances. We've got to remember here that Leclerc made a move around the outside, overtook Russell, so he's taken the lead, and then he was overtaken not once but twice by Verstappen, who obviously had to recover from his spin. So you can imagine he's frustrated getting out of the car. Here's what he said after the race, and it's not cryptic. He's quite direct. He said, "We need to speak with the team and understand the thought behind putting the hard tire on, because I felt very strong with the medium. Everything was under control, and for some reason, I don't know why, we went on the hards. I said on the radio I was comfortable on the medium, and I wanted to go as long as possible on those tires because the feeling was good. I don't know why we took a different decision." So he's clearly pointing at the team, and that was straight after the race. Here's my question for you. Do there was often been criticism of Lewis earlier in his career, wore his heart on his sleeve, radio messages, the haters will find any excuse. But with Leclerc, do you think it's advisable for him to be sort of so directly blaming the team after the race? What do you think? Winner's mentality or not very sort of team-minded?
Well, Black, my mom always used to say something to me, and it's a great Caribbean, what do you call it? Like a saying, basically. If you don't hear, you must feel. And it's the same thing that goes for Ferrari. Because they're not really hearing right now, because they're not really listening, because they're not really taking man in like that, really. They're going to have to start feeling. And if it's through Charles putting pressure on them, through Carlos putting pressure on them, through being publicly embarrassed to get the message, then that's ultimately where they need to go, and that's kind of where you need to respect a driver like Lewis, a driver like Michael, even Max from time to time, as abusive as that one gets, on the radio. It's that emphasis of, I'm not going to let you guys mess me up. I'm not going to let you guys like make me a laughing stock, a meme, a clown. You guys will not get the opportunity to do that with me, and you have to stand up. You have to have that kind of authority, and for Charles, I think he should wear that kind of crown even more heavily so, because bear in mind, Ferrari, he's the only driver, I should remind people that Ferrari have given such a long term contract to. So clearly, Ferrari have always seen him as the prodigy, the one that's going to be the future of the brand. He will be Mr. Ferrari one day if you don't already consider him Mr. Ferrari. So he needs to do that. And I don't think he should be afraid because, if Ferrari doesn't want him, I know there's so many teams on the grid that would take him in a heartbeat. And the difference between him and, let's say, an Alonso, which we'll get onto later, is that Charles is still young. He's still like one of the fastest drivers on the grid out of the new gen. And any driver, any team, they wouldn't even have to ask him twice. You wouldn't even have to put milk in their tea, for them to take him as a serious consideration. So I don't think he should be afraid. I don't think that he should be worried about the tifosi or what the Italian media would say. If something's not correct, I think he needs to be verbal, and he needs to put that pressure on Ferrari as well. Because right now, going back to the other thing you mentioned, I think things are too cool, things are too calm for Ferrari, for a team that, haven't won a championship since the Barack Obama administration.
I think it's actually before, isn't it? Because 07, the election was in 08. I think it's the Bush administration, and that's saying something.
Exactly. Remember Bush? Like, that was a wild time to be alive, man. That was wild. Yeah. So this is ooh.
So I agree with you. I just worry though, when has Ferrari ever accepted criticism? You go back to Prost, and I think he was asked a question about sort of, does the car understeer like a bus? And he just simply said yes. And, that was it. His contract was terminated mid-season, had to take a sabbatical. And we're going to get onto these two in a second. But, Alonso obviously fell out of love with the team. And then more recently, Vettel fell out of love. I think behind the scenes, maybe Carlos Sainz is doing more to endear himself. And, I'm probably going to get the reputation for reading out quotes, but I can't help it. Like this is Carlos Sainz, but you wouldn't be surprised if these words came out of Mattia Binotto. So Carlos Sainz after the race said, I can tell you that when the pace is bad, like today, the strategy is always difficult because if you don't have pace with any compound, you're always going to struggle with strategy because you have very little flexibility. So maybe he's talking about his own pace because, Sainz didn't have the pace of Leclerc this weekend, but there is something, when was it? Was it the last race or something? Sainz basically refused to criticize the team. There's just something about maybe Sainz behind the scenes is a smoother operator, as we say, and he's getting the team around him, even though he's not necessarily the quickest driver. You do wonder whether Ferrari are going to enjoy seeing quotes from Leclerc. But to kind of record a verdict on this, I think the damage is done. I think as you go into the winter break with an 80-point lead, I don't think we've seen an 80-point lead break for a long time. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I think Ferrari have already cost themselves the Drivers' Championship, the Constructors' Championship, and they'll have to pray that after the floor regs are properly enforced, they don't slip back and become the third team, and then they'll wish what could have been. Now we've spoken a bit about drivers that failed to turn around Ferrari. We've got one retiring and one moving teams. First of all, Dens, we've been following Hamilton for a long time. Clearly, in the heated battle of sort of 2016, 2017, and 2018, even the first bit of 2019 before Ferrari's illegal engine was sort of found out and NDA'd out of existence. I found that I didn't like Seb Vettel, who's retired this week. I found that I didn't enjoy him at Red Bull, and maybe I am a hypocrite, but I thought that he basically had the car that meant that he could qualify on pole, get a second get out of the DRS after lap 2, and then cruise off into the distance. But in recent years, Seb Vettel has stood up for sustainability. He's probably been, in my view, given more credit than Hamilton, when perhaps the roles should have been reversed for how outspoken he's been on human rights and other such things. But in doing that, I think we've seen a mellower version of Seb Vettel, and he's definitely won my respect. So Dens, What do you think about Seb's retirement? Do you think it was inevitable? And what do you think of the man?
So yeah, Black, really good question there. In relation to how I view Seb, definitely one of, I think, the role models of the sports and one of the icons, for certain reasons that fit a certain bill, of course. But no, if you're talking about Seb Vettel and his years at Red Bull, as much as I didn't hate it, I wouldn't say that I was as impressed either. Because if you're going to make the comparison between him and Lewis, for example, I think Lewis over the years has shown us that he could win races in many different facets, whether it's on strategy, raw pace and ability, treacherous track conditions, races where things have gone mechanically or strategically wrong, and he's recovered them. Whereas, unfortunately for Seb, I feel that his driving skills suit a particular style of aerodynamics, which were quite evident during that, good run between 2010 2013. But then from 16, 17, 18 and onwards, we saw like a driver that was lacking a lot of confidence, with the machinery underneath him and his driving style not really being suited to certain aerodynamical formulas. So, in terms of the sporting aspect, I think, yeah, Seb's one of the great drivers on the grid, but whether I put him there on the same pedestal as Lewis, it's probably a story or a debate for another day. But then, yeah, in terms of what he's done for the sport on the outside, if you're talking about, like on the kind of human level, I think he's a great ambassador for lots of different things. And I think you hit the nail on the head, absolutely. It's funny how like Seb gets a lot of credit and a lot of credentials for stuff he does when Lewis does actually the same thing, and yet he's just seemed to be as like a politician. But when Seb does it, he's seen as Santa Claus. So quite funny and ironic there as well. But again, I don't blame Seb for that. I think it comes from a genuine place, and kind of like concluding my answer as well. I think that, yeah, this is a man where he's matured. I think his love of the sport has maybe changed, and maybe his love with the FIA has also changed as well, because we heard that very interesting story of him walking out of an FIA meeting and then having to pay a fine for it. So clearly, maybe he's not on the same terms as the FIA and some of the governing bodies. And as well as that, I think maybe he stayed. Maybe he wanted to stay at Aston Martin to see if this year's formula was going to be anything similar to the blown diffuser days. But now that we've seen, it's not quite that. And obviously, it's made the racing closer when the cars are closer to each other. But in terms of the teams, there's still a huge gap between the fastest car and the slowest car. So I think in that regard, maybe he's checked out. And Seb's always been a family man too. So you can obviously, respect a man when it comes to his family and wanting to just, see his kids grow and to just kind of spend more quality time out of the sport.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough. I'm really intrigued to see, what Seb does next, because you can imagine him literally disappearing off the face of the planet. That's like kind of a very plausible option. Or he could end up doing something to do with sustainability. We've seen Lewis with his Extreme X championship, his X44 team. What will Seb do? I don't know. Let's I want to be respectful of Seb here. He's still the record holder for the youngest world champion. I think beating Lewis's record by a couple of 100 days. He won his championships back to back, so 4 in a row. The only guy that's ever done better than that is Michael Schumacher, of course. And in general, sort of in terms of total number of championships, of course, the only people that have beaten him are Fangio, Hamilton, and Schumacher. So yeah, he's up there, statistically or otherwise, he's up there. And it will be a big blow. I know he's got a lot of followers on Twitter. It's quite funny to watch some of them. I hope I'm not alienating too much of them, but I think, in fairness to Vettel, in this era or the one that's slightly before it, he was one of the best of his era, and fair play. And I guess that brings us to the next topic, because linked to that, when did Vettel announce he was leaving? Was it the race weekend, something like that? And then 9:00 Monday morning UK time, I see on my phone a notification suggesting that Alonso signed a multi-year deal with to join Aston Martin. I thought, that can't be right. That's got to be Andrew Benson retweeting another sort of fake account. But no, it turned out that it was all choreographed and already, I'll ask you in a minute what you think is going to happen there for Alonso, but it does make you wonder how long this has all been in the books. It's really interesting. I saw some quotes from around the time of the French Grand Prix. I think it was the president of Renault or something said, Alonso is a champion. He's a core part of our family. We're exploring options and scenarios for him to build the future together, something like that. And not long after, he switched teams, switched to a Mercedes engine car for I think the first time since was he in the original McLaren days? Probably is the last time he had one of those.
Yeah, that's a good point.
For me, it's a huge shock. What do you think drove Alonso to switch from what looks like a forward-moving Alpine team to a team that since the regulation change even last season has been struggling? What do you think motivated this?
Well, it's an interesting one there, Black, because I think you could look at it from both perspectives. To like the normal viewer like myself, I think it seemed like a bit of a sideways move because just like you mentioned there, on the current balance of performance, it seems like, obviously Alpine are much farther ahead in the game with these year's regulations compared to Aston Martin. We've seen that with Ocon and, Alonso consistently filling out the top 5 and even beating McLaren on good days too. But then having said that as well, I think that we also need to remember that Aston Martin is a team going through a big restructure, and maybe in the long term, that might actually work out for them as well. At the beginning of the season when they did their huge car unveiling, good old Big Daddy Stroll did actually remind us quite imminently that he'd invested millions into new Aston Martin headquarter facilities, which was going to be the state-of-the-art resource, for developing F1 cars. So that obviously looks to bring a lot of promise. On top of that as well, we know that quite a few guys have shifted over from Red Bull, from Mercedes as well, and have gone over to Aston Martin. And just generally speaking as well, like we've seen a lot of talk over the last couple of days with Porsche looking to buy a 50% share in Red Bull. But then who knows to say that maybe Audi might not look at Aston Martin too and try and do a takeover with them as well. So the future could actually be quite bright for Aston Martin, although on paper at the moment, it doesn't really seem like they've made really much headway. And all they've done is essentially rip off a Red Bull package, which is not really, flattered to impress ever since they've introduced it. So an interesting one. I think the funny thing with Alonso is that he was renowned in his younger days for being quite impatient, not really trusting in a process. But, taking time out of the sport, doing the Indy 500 a couple of times and failing, having to take part in Dakar racing and failing, it's humbled him, and I think when you're a person with such a big ego and then you get brought to your knees, it does humble you, So I think maybe he's looking to buy into a long-term project there. And perhaps, with the amount of money being generated into it, it might be something that could pay off.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I saw a quote from Alonso saying, Aston Martin is clearly applying the energy and commitment to win. That means they're putting a lot of money in. I think that's code. So I think there's something about him wanting a competitive car. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said ego. I think Alonso still believes he's the best driver, most complete driver on the grid. I'm sure that there'll be some people online on Twitter that agree with that. I'm not one of them. I do think he's still, a force. And if he were in maybe one of those front teams, he would still be competitive for sure. It does surprise me though, because if you look at Alpine, they're for me, most weekends the 4th fastest team. Yes, okay, Lando Norris beat both of them this weekend, but McLaren have had their issues and have been a bit up and down this season, whereas Alpine have been more consistently since a few races in there. So yeah, I must admit I was in a way surprised. But then when you look at the equation from Aston Martin's perspective, why did they hire Sebastian Vettel? Because I think they're eager for success. They want someone that's been there and done it and that's developed cars to help them develop, and that's part of the investment. I also think there's a branding thing. They want a driver that's a champion associated with the brand. If I'm not mistaken, Lawrence Stroll owns Aston Martin outright. It's not just a Formula One team. So, he's looking to sell some road cars and having a kind of world-renowned F1 driver. If If you can't get Lewis, if Seb's retired, then I guess the next one down is Alonso in terms of number of championships. So from an Aston Martin perspective, it makes a heck of a lot of sense. And it wasn't going to be Stroll moving over, was it? So yeah, Daddy Stroll got out the checkbook and has filled the gap. And it will be really interesting to see whether Aston Martin can get a grip on these regs, just in the way that basically they kind of got hamstrung last year when they cut a load of the rear floor away in terms of the technical regs, and this season they've been absolutely nowhere, and in some stages the slowest team on the grid. So I think we should slightly wind up our listeners by saving the conversation about silly season for another episode. But it does open the way for Oscar Piastri to get the Alpine seat or another seat if somebody else moves into the Alpine seat. So maybe that motivated Alpine as well, and I'm excited for that. I think you can't have a F2 champion that's dominated the year as he did, not without a seat. So we'll see. Final question for you on Alonso. Do you think, so he, in his quote, he said, and it's really funny because his ambition level drops a little bit every time he changes teams. He says, I still have the hunger and ambition to fight, to be at the front. So he's not talking about championships anymore. I intend to win again in this sport, and therefore I have to take the opportunities that feel right to me. So question to you, Dan, do you think Alonso is going to win ever again in Formula One?
Well, you could never say never there, Black, can you? And then, there's a good old saying, a clock always strikes correct twice a day. So I would never, ever completely rule it out. But yeah, unless, Aston Martin do an absolute madness with the regulations in the upcoming years, when they basically recreate the third wheel, in the time continuum. Yeah, it seems unlikely. And actually, the more likely faith I think Alonso will follow is one depicted by a very funny meme, because there was a meme out there. I dare go on it with my phone because I fear for the 6th time I'll get kicked out of this recording because of technical issues. But essentially, you're saying, what do Felipe Massa, Vettel, and Alonso have in common? And I think it was like basically failed by Ferrari, and then essentially gonna basically get absolutely out succeeded by Lance Stroll at Aston Martin / Williams.
Yeah, retired by Lance Stroll, and that could be the fate. Let's see. Look, I'm going to do a hard segue because there's really no way to kind of build up to this. We've seen another weekend with problematic behavior, and if we've been chilled so far, I'm going to turn up the temperature. I'm not at all chilled by this. So we saw yet another gang of the Orange Army, and before you attack me, watch the video. There's people wearing orange shirts. There's people wearing Red Bull, livery tracksuits all together. The Orange Army burning Lewis Hamilton merch, burning that black Mercedes cap. I want to cook them. I'm cooking them. We're getting that up to 100 degrees. They're boiling. But do you know who I want to cook more? I want to cook the people that try to rationalize it, because I cannot stand what I've seen. People saying, oh, well, it's not racism. It's because of rivalries. What, you mean like the time Prost supporters were burning Senna merch, or, Alonso supporters were burning Schumacher merch? No, this doesn't happen. It's literally never happened before in F1. So don't come up with that. Or, they bought the merch, so they have a right to do whatever they want. Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, if you want people to buy wood and turn it into a cross and they own it, then they buy some gasoline and a match and they burn that cross wearing a white hood. Are you saying that, they bought all that stuff, so that's fine? Like, absolutely not. And then, people saying, well, Hamilton's so whingy and whiny. He's brought it on himself. All you Hamilton fans are much worse. Blah 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 blah. Like, the people that try to rationalize behavior that is clearly motivated, in my view, clearly by race, burning another driver's merchandise, completely, basically ignored by the people passing by. No security. There was. We'll come to this in a second, but like a half-hearted, generic campaign that appeared to be much more focused on online opinions than anything else. Another weekend, and yet again we're having to talk about the quote-unquote Orange Army. So here's my question. Here's my question to you: Where does this go? Where does this go next? The next race we're going to Spa, Zandvoort won't be far after that. I haven't got a ticket for any of those, and maybe I'd love to go, but part of me is worried. Do you see a pattern here? Where do you think this will go next, Dens?
Well, firstly of all, there, Black, we need to stop referring to them as the Orange Army, because they're not army, and I actually feel that people that refer to them as the Orange Army is distasteful to people that like serve in the forces. So that's the first thing I'm going to say. From now on, I think we should refer to them as the Orange Rats. And Max Verstappen is clearly the Pied Piper of those rats. So that's the first thing I want to get in there. And secondly of all as well, yeah, I mean, we have to actually strip it back a page here, Black, because you see, just to give it context, Max has come out and condemned the fans publicly for their behavior, but that's not good enough. And then even on Martin Brundle's grid walk, they asked Stefano Domenicali, big, head of Formula One management right now, about what's going on. And he basically pointed the finger to social media, which then I'll go into a rabbit hole on that, because some very distressing scenes were seen at the weekend where somebody, and I'm not going to even mention their account name because they don't deserve no clout on this channel, they superimposed a picture of Lewis Hamilton's head on George Floyd's head in that sickening, very distressful picture of a police officer kneeling down on George Floyd, and then put George Russell as the police officer as some sort of sick joke, to which many people reported the abuse online on Twitter, including myself. And all I got from Twitter was, yes, this behavior fits into a category of abuse and discrimination. And the tweet was deleted, but not the guy who made the tweet. So I'll circle back on this. I'll spin the block on that particular example there, Black. But then also what you have to look at is we had this coming, and this is something that we all expressed concern about after Abu Dhabi, when we talked about how much this tension is getting out of control with Max and these people that come into Grand Prix and trying to start a storm. And to be honest with you, Black, I think Sky Sports need to hold themselves accountable. I think Red Bull need to hold themselves accountable. I think the media generally need to hold themselves accountable, because they're the ones that are inciting, this discrimination towards Lewis Hamilton and actually weaponizing Lewis, to such discrimination. And I can give you many examples, such as Christian Horner's distasteful comments in Silverstone, or Jos Verstappen accusing Lewis of taking performance-enhancing drugs from Angelo on the grid, or even recently, if people really suffer from amnesia, the Nelson Piquet comments as well, which were very, very distasteful and concerning coming from a fellow world champion as well. But clearly he's not a world champion and not a champ of the people. So, it brings us back to this first thing we mentioned of, whether or not this is going to be a persisting issue. And I believe it will, because until, the FIA, until the media take more accountability for this and actually take a zero tolerance approach to this unacceptable behavior, then it's just going to continue, and people will think that they can get away with this. And if you don't make people an example, if you don't show people that, that this is not good enough, then they'll just continue to persist to do it. And you see it with children and parents all the time. If you let them get away with a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit of banter here, then they don't establish a level of respect, or common humanity or courtesy for one another. So it's crazy, and they definitely need to do more. I think they need to take a more zero tolerance approach in terms of enforcing bans. And what I'll say as well, and I'll kind of alley-oop it back to you on this one as well, Black, is it's very funny, I don't know if you saw this, or if the listeners had seen this as well. Very funny how the Hungarian security guards had very zero tolerance approach for a photographer, but they didn't have the same energy for a cohort of people, going to the track and burning merchandise. And again, just so I get my kind of 2 cents on that as well. No, it's not just burning merchandise. No, it's not just buying something and burning it. What they're doing there is something which goes and has a lot of dark history back to the days of the KKK, when they were lynching black people, or when they were beating black people up, or when they were doing absolutely, I wouldn't even think this like abysmal things, to black people. Black people have had to come through such a hard time, through history, So it's not just burning merchandise. I don't buy that logic either. It's quite reminiscent, of a particular, racist group that was quite prevalent, in the early 90s in America. And as you mentioned, if you don't put a stop to behavior like this, it just gets worse and worse. And you've seen it. You don't need me to tell you that, in Austria, women, somebody's wife, somebody's sister, somebody's mother, somebody's, that is somebody to someone was sexually assaulted. You don't need me to tell you that, homophobic slurs and remarks were being used casually. You don't need me to tell you that fans were, lighting, pyrotechnics, and it was almost impossible for drivers to see at apex, going through some corners. So yeah, I think a lot needs to be done in terms of the media, a lot needs to be done by the sport, and a lot needs to be done on social media too, to continue to police and stamp this sort of behavior out.
Yeah, I mean, let's kind of like segue into that hashtag drive it out campaign, because if you want to find, if you're studying PR or media relations or anything like that, and you want to see like tone deaf, lack of understanding, then look out of this drive it out campaign. So the backstory is that earlier in the season, I think it was, or maybe even in the off season, sort of inexplicably, Formula One sort of ended its "We Race as One" campaign. Okay, so they got rid of that slogan. I'm not really sure what else it did, but clearly they did have at each race a message of solidarity from the drivers and what they called a gesture. Some drivers taking the knee, others, for their apparent reasons, deciding not to. Anyway, they got rid of that campaign, and then I remember it must have been the Saturday night, maybe it's a Friday night, whenever this burning happened. The following morning, there was a comment by an F1 media member who I won't mention on here, who said, "Oh well, you just wait 1 hour. You're serious. You just see how serious F1 takes, this sort of behavior and this sort of abuse." And I thought it's going to be a joke. It's going to be terrible. But do you know what? I'll give it a chance. And then do you know what? It turned out it was a hashtag. So they've gone from "We Race as One" to drive it out, and so much wrong with it. First of all, and we've discussed this, it's so online focused. It says abuse of any kind is not welcome online, and then it says comma or anywhere in F1. It's like, so it's, for a start, it's targeting online abuse, which absolutely, let's get rid of online abuse. These images, which for some reason accounts are not purged from Twitter for posting, yeah, absolutely unacceptable. Let's get rid of that. The thing I don't like, and this is something that you see a lot when people are trying not to address issues. You say, "Oh, will you condemn this racism?" Or, what about this specific example? And then people respond, "Oh, well, of course, I condemn abuse of any kind." And they're very generic in their response. So first of all, I'm not a big fan of that. The second thing is, listen, this is a phrase that doesn't fill me with confidence, right? Those who, so it says, "Those who hide behind social media with abusive and disrespectful views are not our fans," right? So absolutely, we don't want people hiding behind social media and being abusive. And maybe disrespectful views does mean, being intolerant and being completely nasty to other people. But part of me, I have a nagging feeling that since Abu Dhabi, Formula One, the powers that be, they've not enjoyed the ride that they've had on Twitter and on other platforms, because quite frankly, they've made huge mistakes in administering their sport. They've then attempted to gloss it over, to brush it under the carpet. And people online have quite rightly said, well, hang on a minute. No, this is not acceptable. And I just worry that quote unquote disrespectful views, I wouldn't be surprised if people in F1 HQ and the FAA would include those of us who stood up against the calamity that was, or the conspiracy that was Abu Dhabi, that they wouldn't lump us in with that. What was your first impression, Dens, of the Drive It Out campaign when you saw it going live that morning?
Black, they can drive my back foot, because that to me means nothing. It means nothing at all. That is just another blanket statement to paper over the cracks, man. Like, you know, the people think that we're really stupid, or they must have thought that we were born at breakfast or something, because, you know, clearly they haven't lived a day in the shoes of people like you or I, man. And this is the thing. So it doesn't surprise me. And I think, unfortunately for me, Black, I think this is not something that's going to get solved over the course of a day. I think that this is going to be years of cleansing, years of protesting. And as much as I hate to see it or say it, I think it's going to be a thing which is going to have to be, you know, enforced and drilled into these people long after Lewis retires. Because it's the sort of thing where these people come from a place of privilege, you know, some heat's been put onto them to do something. And they don't really care, but to shut people up, they've just tried they're trying to do something to be seen as doing something rather than actually trying to do something, which is the two big differences I want people to take away from this. But yeah, you know, it's just not good enough. And, you know, whether it's just like online abuse, whether it's on the circuit abuse, there's just no place for abuse whatsoever. And saying that, you know, there's no place for abuse is one thing. How you're going to deal with there being no abuse is the thing that I think we need to focus onto and put a lot of pressure on the FIA and all the media bodies to do. Because, you know, like I said, there was that whole bust up. I don't know if you saw, like, this photographer had a bit of a misdemeanor with a security guard, and he got his lip absolutely bump up. So why I can't understand if a guy is there like being racist, if a guy, you know, is there being homophobic, if a guy there is being like, you know, narcissistic, if a guy's being disruptive, why it's not the same energy that it gets met up with? Because ultimately it should be the same, you know. And I think there's an educational part of it. I think that there's a lot of things that people need to learn still. Then again, you can't force a horse to drink water. There's certain people that they're not interested in learning, and they're more than content and happy holding these stupid views. So we need to take away the power from them and not engage with them, firstly of all. But secondly of all, like I said, it goes back to the original thing. Zero tolerance is what I'm on now. Black, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. Like, you know, when Lewis Hamilton was lying down on the ground in Poor Ricard, like, I'm tired. Like it's because it's week in, it's week out, and it's not getting better really. It's getting worse, and it's for the reasons I mentioned earlier too. You know, me and you could see this coming from a mile away. You know, because we see it in our day-to-day lives. You know, and we foreshadowed that this would be the you know the kind of the kind of direction that it was going to go for Formula One. You know, and this is what it's like now when Lewis is around, you know, and Sebastian Vettel's around, and these are the guys that actually trying, you know, proactively to enforce change. So imagine how much of a dark place it will be when they both move on and when they have other better things to do in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stories we talked about, they all link together, right? So I think the only thing that will change Formula One's approach or FIA's approach is money, because ultimately they're big corporates and they want to return value to the shareholder in Liberty Media's case, or FIA want to basically make money and get the prestige that they feel is, you know, afforded to them. So until people take a stand and basically stop patronizing Formula One in one way or another, or until basically it have to get so bad that people will not feel comfortable or will not feel comfortable paying money for this stuff. It will have to get that bad before F1, I think, takes action, or until there's enough of an uproar that they will take action. And for me, that's sort of what happened on Abu Dhabi, and that they hoped it would go away. they suddenly changed the arrangements for what was testing, but then became a shakedown by saying that no fans could be at Barcelona because they knew there'd be fans turning up and protesting. And then the stories didn't go away, and then they had to basically admit human error. And the same with this. I really, really worry for the safety of anyone that isn't part of the Orange Rat Brigade, as you called them. Anyone that isn't basically a white cis straight male that doesn't support Max, or maybe some of the other guys that they looked okay on, but maybe if you support Lewis or one of the others like that, I really worry for your safety. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't go, because that's exactly how they win, but I just genuinely don't think this is going to end well. And clearly Formula One hasn't learned its lesson. It's put out a statement the other week around Hungary saying, Austria saying, oh, well, we've talked to the event organizer. Do you know why they said that? Because Formula One doesn't feel accountable, because they think it's all to do with the circuit, nothing to do with them. And therefore, well, we've sort of spoken to the people whose fault it is, and I'm sure they'll sort it out. Sadly, I think it's going to have to get worse before it gets better. I don't know, Dens, if you've got any more kerosene to put on the fire, because the next one is also going to add some. But any more on that story before we move on to our Australian friend and NDA?
Yeah, I see where you're going with that one, Blag. And no, we articulated the points brilliantly, because that's what ultimately comes down to, and they stink. So, when something stinks, you need to flush out the stench. You need to throw them guys in the toilet, which is exactly where they deserve to go, man. So I don't have any sympathy for them. I have no compassion for them. There's no space or time for people like that, idiots. And personally for me, like you mentioned, maybe it has to get worse before it gets better. And that's kind of why I think it's great, that we use this platform not only just to talk about Formula One, but other motorsports too, because we see Mercedes take a clean sweep in 2 other motorsport disciplines, which we'll get onto a bit later, and if the consumer can understand the value of what they bring, and if they can get invested, in other series, it's ultimately Formula One that misses out, because without the fans, there is no Formula One, there is no Grand Prix, there is no race weekend, and we saw that, quite a lot during the pandemic, and just like how soulless the championship. I mean, as a Lewis fan, championship was one of the best. It always had, there's that, he had that W11, he made all these achievements and records, and none of us were there, to witness it. And that says it all, we weren't there to witness it. So if you then flip it on its head and you apply that kind of thing to what's going on now, with these bigots and their very stupid behavior, then if we put the emphasis and the pressure on the FIA, we can definitely do it, and people need to take a lot of pride in the power, because as we always say, pressure does bust pipes. And we saw it, with basically us strong-arming the FIA to come out and basically admit indirectly that, their decision, which cost Lewis the A4 championship, was through their own human error. So we do have power and we do have the ability to make change. But what I would remind people is, it's not something that's going to change overnight, unfortunately. And sometimes, as my parents always used to say to me, difficult roads sometimes can lead to beautiful destinations. So, we mustn't be up, downbeat. We mustn't take it as like an impossible feat to achieve. It just takes time.
No, it just takes time. And, I wish everybody who goes to the Belgian Grand Prix or the Dutch Grand Prix or any other, for that matter, every safety. And there are some really useful Twitter threads that set out, ways to stay safe. And it feels crazy that I even have to say that. But, when I've finished recording the episode, I think I'm going to retweet one of those threads. And again, when we get to Spa, just to make sure that people know how to look after themselves in these situations. And, let's segue by having to put out a disclaimer, okay? Because there are so many bad faith actors. Look, it's not okay to send death threats to anyone. I don't care if you think that they're, abominable, you think that they are vile, whatever. I want to put on record, because people will try and twist my words, that it is completely unacceptable to send threats of violence or death threats to anybody whatsoever. And so this weekend, of course, speaking, I think it was to the Australian Daily Telegraph, Michael Massey broke his silence, or did he, by giving an interview and revealing that he received death threats in the aftermath of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix last year. So he said, I feel like I was the most hated man in the world. He then said, I got death threats, people saying they were going to come after me and my family. And then he talked about an experience in London, which, in brackets, I don't think anyone knew he was in London. So, fair enough. But walking down the street in London a day or two later, I thought I was okay until I started looking over my shoulder. I was looking at people wondering if they were going to get me. So look, death threats, if you disagree with me on that, then, don't interact with me. I won't interact with you. Leave me alone. That's a moral, like a fundamental and basic moral point that I have to underline here. But if you read the article by Michael Massey, it absolutely sort of shows that what Toto Wolff said a few months ago is correct. This guy, absolutely the victim of abuse in the aftermath, but this guy single-handedly cheated Lewis Hamilton and fans and his mechanics and the entire team out of the rightful 8th World Championship that he was 1 lap or 2 laps away from getting, by applying, quote unquote, applying rules, aka making up rules as they went along, in a way that meant that Max Verstappen basically was gifted the victory and therefore gifted the championship. And before I come to you, Dens, the funny thing a few people have pointed out to me is, if you didn't have Abu Dhabi, we'd have a lot more focused on what happened in Jeddah last season, because that was a calamity. The number of times that Verstappen came back on track and ran Hamilton into a wall, or Hamilton had to back out, or he didn't break into turn 1 and basically caused contact. And then Massey negotiating with Red Bull about what the penalty was going to be, the brake check, then giving Lewis Hamilton a black and white flag. It was a complete, show. Keeping it PG for our youthful audience. but this guy was out of his depth. He was completely rude in front of hundreds of millions of people and disrespectful in the way he conducted his work. And this is the thing. He's not apologized one bit. But there might be a reason for that. So what we discovered in the same interview is it's come to light that Michael Massey has signed a non-disclosure agreement with the FIA, which means that it's probably unlikely that we'll ever hear his side of the story, his version of events. And for me, that would be an incredibly intriguing version of events, even if he were to sort of spin it with his side, because he was the guy that received the radio messaging from Jonathan Wheatley, and he was the guy that ultimately made the calls that were against the rules and that had to be covered up by the stewards thereafter. So Dens, my opinion on this guy. I think basically he's trash. I still wouldn't threaten violence against trash, but I would hope that he would have the sort of, I don't know, merit to recognize his mistakes. Clearly, he's not done so. What do you think about this NDA? Do you think that we'll ever hear the truth? And also, did you read the article? Did you hear some of his comments? What do you think of Michael Massey's return to the public eye 6 months later?
Well, Black, it's a great question, and boy, what can I say, man? They got Michael Massey in FIA witness protection, and that it's long. But it's man. In the short version of what I'm just about to say, we'll never know. Something smells funny and something doesn't look right in the light. That rhymes. But clearly, there's something that they don't want to become public knowledge, because of course, then why is the NDA there? And we have to think about it too. Michael Massey is one person, and the guy that gets the corn, should I say, because he is the one that was the voice. He's the one that was actually the one that inherited the position from the great Charlie Whiting. So yes, he gets a lot of stick, but there's part of me that believes that it's not just one man that was able to create so much, disaster. And you mentioned, if it hadn't been for Abu Dhabi, it would have been Jeddah. I could one up you on that one, Black. If it wasn't for Jeddah, it'd be Brazil. Because I don't know if you remember in Brazil where Max completely forgot to turn a corner, completely ran loose off the road. And then the incident was noted, and then it's like the whole FIA monitoring system got frozen, like Elsa, because it just continued to be noted and no action was taken afterwards. And then obviously there was the onboard footage that should have been on Max Verstappen's car. And again, we didn't see that footage for about, maybe 9-10 days. The FAA were trying to basically let the footage marinate and that in the sauce. So yeah, I mean, obviously Michael Massey will take the brunt for it. He had to fall for his actions. He's quite incompetent, as could be evidenced by quite a few races. It's not just one crazy night in Abu Dhabi. There were multiple occasions where stewarding fell below the standard, and most of the sensible ones of us can come to the same conclusion. But as you mentioned there, yeah, it is really weird that they have made him sign an NDA. You could argue maybe it's for his own good, because if he was to have free reign or free speech and to say the truth, I think one, people would still be angry at him anyways, and two, it would then put a lot of other people in the firing line. But ultimately, it's sad because we'll never know, and you'll get a lot of people out there that will just say, "Oh, you're crying. Oh, it's been 7 months and you still haven't got over it. You're salty." But I want them to know they're saltier than saltfish patties. Let's just get that in there too. But yeah, it's not tracking for me, Black. It's a bit of like, what's the name of that really eerily creepy series called Unsolved? Oh, gonna give it away straight away. Unsolved Mysteries. I think one day in the future, when me and you are, hopefully retired in, a nice island somewhere in Barbados, and Georgina's helping us live off the fat of the land, there might be a wild episode on Unsolved Mysteries with Michael Massey being the star of that show, because we'll never know, and I think that there's a lot of things which happen that we're not privy to. I think that, when you've got this like $1 billion boys club and they're so infatuated with basically, upholding a record that was like, made by Michael Schumacher, and then Lewis Hamilton was gonna easily, he's only 3 or 4 laps. You know how bad it is when even Christian Horner comes onto the radio and says, "Michael, you only need 1 lap, Michael." Like, people get on to Toto for saying, "No, Mikey, this is so not right." But people don't remember that Christian Horner was the one begging on the radio, "Mikey, you only need 1 lap, Mikey. 1 lap, Mikey," and that. That's what I have to call him as well now. 1 lap, Mikey. But yeah, just like there's just a multiple series of events. We'll never know. And I guess we'll only hear maybe Lewis's side of it. Maybe when, this documentary or film comes out about him. I know that he'll probably write another book as well when he's ready to. But yeah, I don't know if I buy into the idea that it was strictly Massey, although I think Massey needs to take accountability and apologize. But then obviously if you apologize, you admit guilt. And we know they're guilty, but they don't want to admit they're guilty. So it's crazy. It's crazy, Black. It's just like I said, like Unsolved Mysteries, that one.
I wonder if with Ferrari gifting Max a second present, with this second title, I wonder if when Max has a second championship, whether we'll start to get a little bit of a softening and people will start to acknowledge that the 2021 championship was a sham. But, we never know. There was a story of a guy that was cheated out of an Olympic medal in like 1912 or something, and only this year was the record corrected. So, I'm kind of happy with that, because it means I'm going to live a long life, because I'm going to keep going until they sort this. But no, look, I wish Michael Massey every health. I don't wish him every success, but I hope that he kind of as a human grows and learns the importance of transparency, honesty, treating fellow man with respect, and hopefully one day he's him and the FIA are willing to tell the truth. But until then, they will not have my respect. Look, let me put two things that were also runs that nearly, I would say, nearly got on the oven before we go to our final oven point. The first thing for me, and I don't know if you have others to add. The first thing to me is Lewis Hamilton's DRS. Imagine if he on Saturday had that for that Q3 second run. We could be talking about his win. His win in Hungary, and which would be his 9th, I think, and his first for the season. That's my first also ran. My second also ran, and it's linked to it, is the double DRS activation. So those of you that didn't study the maps will normally every weekend of a race, you'll get the event notes, and they'll show a map which has all of the different sort of sectors, and it has the DRS activation. But it also has the point where, I can't remember, what's the word? The point where they measure whether you're a second behind the car. My brain's gone. But unfortunately, so I think the activation is when the DRS actually opens. But there's one.
Oh,
there's another
the detection. The detection.
Point. There we go. Yeah. So the DRS detection, I think, is just in Hungary, and I don't know if you spotted the pattern, but basically that DRS detection worked for the activation down the front straight and the activation out of turn 1 into turn 2. And for me, absolutely Hungary, difficult track for overtaking. But it did mean that if you got the pass done into turn 1, you basically had no threat from the other driver coming back. So those are my two also runs, both DRS related. I don't know, Denz, if you have any also runs or if you have any comments on those before we move to our US segment, as it were.
Of course, but yeah, it's an interesting one as well there, Blag, and I think you touched the right points there. Hungary has always been a very difficult circuit for overtaking. Lewis has always said it's basically Monaco without the wars, and he feels like he's driving a bicycle or riding a bicycle through his living room, which I think was a great analogy. But yeah, the DRS detection points, it's small. It's either there or here. To be honest, I've never really liked the second DRS detection point on the games because you're coming out of turn 1, which is a very low speed second, third gear corner, and the detection point comes up before Santa could even deliver your present. So you have to be so careful with getting onto the power before you open the second DRS. But then it does do something interesting because we've seen that most people conventionally go for the inside line, but then actually the outside of turn 2 basically turns to the inside of turn 3. So we've seen a lot of moves where people have been able to swoop around the outside. I think Leclerc tried it through Russell a couple of times, and then the real Minister of Defense, George, was able to defend it, at least in the first stint before the pit stops. And then maybe not so keenly, we saw Daniel Ricciardo trying to do the same thing as well to Stroll, but unfortunately, he locked the brakes and gave Stroll a bit of a love tap. So he definitely was able to rule him not going out to Aston Martin for 2023. But yeah, interesting one. And then you touched on the Lewis points as well. And yeah, just, these things could happen. It's not nice, obviously, when it happens to Lewis because that's our guy. But again, this shows the strength of personality from Lewis, to not give up, to keep his head up. Again, another electric start, man. He absolutely fried Norris, later on in the Grand Prix as well, which was amazing, and I'm sure he would have jumped Perez too. So that was incredible. And again, just just that experience, in that class. And even for him to get the fastest lap shows, that Mercedes does have some pace in it. It just has some potential that probably still needs to be realized during the summer break, even though it is a bit of a lockdown. So, yeah, I mean, we can only dream. We can only kind of imagine what would happen if Lewis didn't have the DRS issue and he slapped it on pole. And then, credit to Russell too. He didn't quite have the pace in the end to hold Max, and caught by Lewis as well. But that first stint he did on the soft tires against Leclerc on the mediums was really good, and I think for his confidence too, he's having to work for it. It's not going to just be given to him, but to see him put that work in as well and, for Mr. Saturday to finally live up to his name as well in qualifying on a day where Lewis, wasn't able to because of the technical issue. I was happy for him too, and just generally really strong performance from Mercedes as well. That definitely must be added.
Yeah, I mean, I can't be unhappy if you look at the start of the season where that Mercedes was. It was really painful to watch. It kind of compounded. We talk about how our sort of the ingredients that we brought tonight are all going together really well. That how much was the pain of Abu Dhabi compounded by seeing that Mercedes out of the box just looking terrible. So, getting a sort of consecutive double podium, we can't say fairer than that. That's let's get the win in the second half of the season, but we've got to be content with the pace, the evolution of the car, and yeah, as you say, the overall performance. So that's fair enough. Mm-hmm. So should we move to the US section? Should we talk a bit about, or should we say the US and the Spanish section? Should we talk a bit about the latest in the Alex Palou saga? It's quite funny because I follow someone called Jenna Fryer, who is a great authority on IndyCar gossip. She's fantastic. I'd encourage you to give her a follow. And I was just looking at her tweets to do with Palou, even as we record this. So when we start, a tweet came out from her account saying Alex Palou has asked for the lawsuit, and I'll explain that there's a lawsuit. What's going on? Should be moved to a federal court because essentially Alex Palou, because he's Spanish. Now, look, what's happened here, for those that don't know, is that a few weeks ago, Alex Palou, who's the reigning IndyCar champion, he appeared to announce that he'd be staying with his current team, Chip Ganassi Racing. There was a quote from him in a press release given by the team, except the following day, Alex Palou completely denied ever having given those quotes and said, actually, no, I'm not staying at Chip Ganassi Racing. I'm going to McLaren. And it's very interesting because I say the word McLaren loosely. We know that McLaren has teams in Formula E, Formula One, for which it's most famous, and IndyCar. So we thought it was over. Okay, there's a little bit of some shenanigans, but actually Alex Palou will be going to Mercedes. Also, because Chip Ganassi fired back and said, no, I've got a contract with you, so I've got an option for you to be in the Chip Ganassi car, and you'll be in it in 2023, and that's just how it is. So completely sort of surprising, I think, to the IndyCar paddock. This whole saga has moved from just being a bit of gossip, a bit of private wrangling, to a court case. Believe it or not, it's gone to a court in Marion County, which I think, where is Marion County? One of our US listeners will tell us. I don't know if it's in Indiana, but I could be wrong. Might be Georgia, but maybe not. It's gone to a local court to be heard. And just tonight, Alex Palou has said he wants that case to be heard in a federal court. He's saying it's because he's a permanent resident of Spain and that he's only a temporary resident of Indiana and has a non-permanent working visa. And that's why he wants to move it to a federal court. The Chip Ganassi team has sort of responded saying, basically, it's a load of rubbish. I'll make one final point before I bring you in, Dens. The reason I use the word McLaren loosely is because what we understand is that Alex Palou has a contract that says he's not allowed to engage with other IndyCar teams, to consider future drives, contracts, etc., while he's under contract with Chip Ganassi. So when you saw Alex Palou's statements and actually the motion he's filed, etc., he talks a lot about this is Chip Ganassi preventing me from realizing my dream of driving in Formula One. How many of our listeners think that Alex Palou will be in that McLaren seat next year instead of Ricciardo? I certainly don't. But he's clearly treading on some very, very shaky ground. And in fact, his filing, when he asked to move the case to the federal court, this is legalese, and where's Malik when you need him? It says defendants currently, so that he's basically, it says he's anticipating asserting non-contractual counterclaims, including at least for defamation. So what does that mean? That means he's not, as far as I understand, it means he's not arguing about the contract, but instead his claim against Chip Ganassi is that he's been defamed. So, question for you, Dans. What do you make of this situation? What the heck is going on? What do you think Alex Palou is going to end up doing next year? And who do you think is going to win, Chip or Alex? What do you think?
Man, well, let me say this, Black. It's messy, and I'm not talking about the Argentine either. It's very messy, this situation, and I feel, like there's a good Jamaican proverb: if fish never used to open their mouth, then them never get caught. In a sense that, if Alex hadn't gone basically running his mouth, or his people hadn't gone running their mouth and, doing such things in this particular order, it wouldn't be as messy as it's become, because you're hearing so many different stories. I think a perspective that we haven't mentioned is Zach Brown's perspective, of which he's come out to kind of defend himself, probably because he's seen a couple of us grilling him. And he was basically explaining that he had no idea that Alex Palou was still contracted to Chip Ganassi. And the way that Alex Palou's people had presented him was that he was free to speak to. So essentially, that's why they've come out and basically said, you do what you have to do. We're basically not going to get involved, and we're not going to buy you out of your contract. Which is why now we've got this situation, a civil situation between Alex and Chip Ganassi Racing as to what's going to happen with contract. Because, of course, they need him to race for them next season. He probably wants to get himself, more acclimatized with the McLaren program. And should Ricardo not, go on with McLaren post 2023, he probably wants to line himself up to be first in line on the throne. So it's an interesting one, and as to who will win out, it's going to be really tough to say there, Black, because at the end of the day, Chip Ganassi do have a contract. It does seem quite evident that that is the case. There's a new element you've mentioned that's been brought into it as well, and it almost seems like Alex Palou is trying to counter claim on defamation, because obviously now all this stuff's happening. It's not necessarily doing the world of good for his reputation, if I can get the word out. But ultimately, there can be a winner in the solution. It just comes down to whether or not they want to work on that solution, because at the end of the day, Alex is a great driver. You don't become the reigning IndyCar champion, by being mediocre. So that there's always that. Also, for people that don't know about Alex Palou, he had a very decorated career in Formula Japan too. So he is the sort of driver that you could see transitioning into Formula One. And there's been many drivers that have transitioned from Formula, Japan into, Formula One, such as Kamui Kobayashi, and obviously as well, Jenson Button's done some racing out there. And also, obviously, Yuki Tsunoda, young Yuki. So it does seem a bit kind of harsh to me, that Chip Ganassi are, basically in this guy's way. And even from Chip Ganassi's side as well, all isn't lost for them. They still have Scott Dixon, which is a veteran racing driver and a very accomplished. I think he beat a record the other day for actually superseding Mario Andretti in terms of, podiums, I think, or was it race wins? One of the two, which is quite a lot, They've got Marcus Ericsson, the Swedish GOAT, which was leading the championship, but unfortunately now it's not the case. So hopefully that Husky Chocolate can give him a bit of kick up the rear. Man, they even got Jimmy Johnson. The man, the myth, the legend, Jimmy J. So I don't understand why Chip are being so kind of tough about it, and those are just the current IndyCar drivers. They've got Tony Kanaan, another amazing driver on the sideline. They've got Alex Lynn, a very decorated F2 driver that also does World Endurance Championship racing, and legendary Sebastian Bourdais. I know that you and the legendary F1 fans know about Sebastian Bourdais, in relation to his Toro Rosso days back in the day. But yeah, long story short, I think that something has to give. I could understand Chip kind of playing hardball and saying, well, listen, you're going to drive for us. And if you don't want to drive for us, pay up, So I think the mistake that Palou and his people will probably learn from this, is, don't, what's the good old saying? Don't celebrate too early until you cross the line, because it's clear to see that business wasn't completely finished or conducted. And ultimately as well, it didn't need to be this. We see, contractual disputes happening all the time, and often they get kind of done and dusted, within a couple of days. This is a saga now that's been running for the best part of a couple of weeks, and it doesn't really seem that it's gonna, subside anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking as you were saying, like, because you were sort of why is Chip getting in his way? If we convert this into football, would you want to see your star player, your champion, transfer to another club in the Premier League or whichever league you're in? The answer is no. And when you look at IndyCar, one of the things that I really love about it is it's essentially a spec series. People might not want to hear that, but it's the same Dallara chassis. There's a couple of engine suppliers. Maybe there's a third one coming in due course, but a lot of it comes down to the driving. Clearly, it comes down to the way that the car's set up as well. But Palou won the championship against all odds last season. He's still sort of in the hunt this season. He's just about a win's worth of points off the lead, but with 4 races to go, you never know what might happen. So seeing, if I was in Chip Ganassi's shoes, for sure, I wouldn't want to see him moving to, one of my rivals. If you consider McLaren and Andretti as perhaps and Penske alongside, Chip Ganassi as the front 4, the big 4, as it were, in the Premier League back in the day. As for what might happen, I think you hit the nail on the head. Money talks. Looking at the statements that were made, clearly, I think it's Chip Ganassi would favour private arbitration. Private arbitration is code for how much are you going to pay me to breach your contract. So maybe McLaren won't pay, but maybe Palou will have to dig into his pockets and find a way, or pay some money over a period of time in installments. So that's where I think it will go. But who knows? Alex Palou may have cost himself a glittering career if he signs with neither of these two teams, or if he's burnt the bridges on both sides. You never know what might happen, and he's not exactly the most marketable guy. We talked about that last time, so it's not a slam dunk that he'll go to one of the other big teams. So we'll see on that. And for our American listeners, know that Marion County is in Florida, of course. Who doesn't know that?
And they're gonna cook you for that one,
in Florida. Yeah, I know. It's like, is it? Who knows? I'm still learning my states. It's all good. But as we wrap up the episode, IndyCar is still something that I'm following a lot. Following it, getting it back into it. Did you see the race at the weekend, Dens? Did you see my boy Rossi absolutely dominate it? And let's ignore the fact that Herta retired. And crossed the line with a huge 3 or 4 second advantage. It's a fantastic result for Alexander Rossi. Did you see the race?
I definitely caught parts of it, Black. What's confusing me right now with the whole IndyCar program is it's just so like up and down. So some races are on a Saturday, some races are on a Sunday. Sometimes you have 2 races because the previous race in Iowa, there was actually like a short, I wouldn't call it a sprint race, but like a long race, and then on Sunday there was a shorter version of that race. Unfortunately, Newgarden crashed out of that, but it opened up the championship even more. So yeah, I caught bits of it, but that actually ties into something I wanted to say as well. Is, man, what a week of just motorsport racing it was as well, man. Because we didn't even mention, we also have to shout out, the other boys on the block, man, like Nick De Vries and Stoffel Van Dorn winning the London E Grand Prix in Formula E as well. And one other note I wanted to just mention too, just, for women, this was a very powerful week too, man. Like I caught, whilst you were watching IndyCar, I was trying to cover ground on the Spa 24 hours because, for a lot of our listeners trying to explore different avenues, Spa, which we obviously go to in Formula 1 too. We had that non-event of a race last year. It was also home to a 24-hour endurance race for the sports car GT3 guys, So my guy, Raffaello Marcello was there competing amongst other drivers like Felipe Nasr, was a familiar name I saw, and some other, cool kids as well. I think even Jack Aiken was there after his very treacherous crash he had at Spa last year with the old configuration of Eau Rouge, which is something we could probably discuss during the summer break. But coming back to my original point, amazing, what just like the women are achieving as well, because I witnessed the first ever Saudi Arabian female driver to finish on the podium and win in a category as well. Her name is let me get it. Rima Jafali. So Rima, if you're ever listening to this podcast, you're amazing, and we're super, super, super proud. Hashtag big respect. And I hope that Georgie the boss can reach out to you soon for your own exclusive episode, because I'd love to get your take on this, how your experience was. We had Samantha Tan as well, Canadian GT3 driver. She owned, I think, a BMW M4 racing team. So she participated and did well. She completed the 424 hours. And then Ferrari also, we grilled Ferrari earlier, but they actually have like a all-female GT3 team as well. They're called the Iron Dames. And basically it's a team consisting of all female drivers, all female engineers, and all female mechanics, which, if that's not legendary, I don't know what is. So huge big up to the gal them. They're really showing us men how it's done. And I know we don't often speak about like football, but like, man, how as living in all that is glorious in Britain, how can we not talk about the Lionesses' dominant performance against Germany too in the Euro 2022 finals as well? And finally, the men couldn't bring it home, so I'm glad the women did.
Yeah, I mean, all those jokes about navigation. The men were the ones that couldn't find their way home, and the women nailed it. So huge congratulations to the Lionesses. I mean, obviously, when you follow football as an English person, you're always doubting. But was it ever really in doubt? They looked serene throughout the entire tournament, and even when they went behind, I think it was in the quarters or the semis, they pulled it back. They absolutely nailed it. So huge congratulations. Unfortunately, I wasn't in work today because I don't work far from here, but they had a celebration in Trafalgar Square, and I wish I'd been there to see it, because it's been a kind of a fan zone for the entire tournament, and you could feel the atmosphere. So huge congratulations they deserve. I hope they get that notoriety, and I hope it brings in more fans into the league, so that it's a kind of consistent and sustainable growth in the women's game. So huge congratulations, and linked to that, talking of women's sport, my favorite, I always root for the underdog, and my favorite in the W series is Alice Powell. So she went back to winning ways this weekend and won the Hungarian leg of the W series. So it's a huge shout out to her, and another English, or we should say British driver. So huge congrats. Gosh, and I don't know if you have further comment on that, but you talk about a fantastic weekend for sport. I think it's going to be a fantastic forward schedule for this podcast. The number of we can't give all the names out, but some of the episodes you've already got in the can, Dens, and some of the ones that are coming up. I strongly recommend people to kind of subscribe or to kind of favorite us, because I put out a tweet the other day. I just couldn't believe the number of guests you've had, the quality, the caliber over the first 3 or 4 months of the podcast ends. And looking ahead, it's got some regulars coming back, and we've got some new faces, new voices. It's going to be amazing.
Absolutely, Black. Nah, man, let's name drop them. Man, because I'm sure the boss isn't going to beat us too badly. But, the regulars, you got the likes of Bryson Sullivan, my guy, Bryson with the F1 tech. Always a pleasure to have him on here. Got Brad Philpott, one of my favorite drivers. And I don't just say this, as just, he's a dude you follow on Twitter. Like, Brad is a phenomenal driver, super talented. His knowledge of Formula One, the FIA rulebook as well, and just his series, Behind the Visor. Cheeky plug there. Amazing. We've even got FIA Girly, my girl, Denny, making a reappearance in the show as well, which is always great too. She keeps us in the loop to what's going on, and it feels like she has more than like two eyes, because you just hear everything about Mercedes and Lewis and what's going on. And I find her kind of like schedule and just her Twitter log really useful just to catch up to speed. And we got some newbies as well, man. I'm not gonna let the complete cat out the bag before Georgina revokes my ice cream pass. But we got Wolfpack Performance coming on the show. Good old Wolfpack Performance, legendary guy. I've seen him grinding on YouTube and making stand-up content as well. So big up Wolfpack Performance. Gonna get him soon. We've got a fellow Ferrari fan joining us, and David Noble, one of the greatest coolest Ferrari heads, you know, in the F1 Twitter space as well. So big up David Noble joining us this month too. We were talking about, like, you know, the 24 hours, and as a driver, a strategist, it must be tiring, but as like a commentator and an interviewer, geez, it must be really challenging, you know, having to ask those tough questions to drivers that crash out or have reliability issues. And I couldn't think of a better placed person to have that discussion with other than Amanda Busick. So I'm also very, very excited to have her on, and that's just a list of a few. So guys, make sure that you stay tuned for the future episodes coming out this month. You know, whilst there's a summer break going on in F1, at Stripping the Dipping, we don't sleep. We just continue working and putting out the amazing content. So make sure that you keep tuned. Also, as I mentioned earlier in the show as well, huge shout out to a very good dear friend of mine as well, Asaf Saji. He's a legend. He's got a very awesome prize. I know somebody you'll be very lucky to win. So maybe off air, me, Blag, and the boss lady need to consult on how we're going to give away that prize and how we're going to basically run that competition. But stay tuned for that. And yeah, like I said, like, you know, we've gone full circle this episode. We had a couple of, you know, moments where it got a bit hot, got very hot, and we had to turn up that heat. But, you know, for the most part, I think everybody, the good people, the sensible people, you know, they can go to the summer break with their heads held high and, you know, with a lot to look forward to over the next coming weeks as well. But I'll definitely hand over to you.
I'd recommend people listen to the scandal episodes, athletes and sports cheating scandals. Malik, Jay, Georgina, and yourself, absolutely on fire. Really hilarious. I think we dropped that one the other day. So really, really recommend that one. Well, I think we're at the end. Thanks to those that have stuck around. As Den said, the Ferrari howlers, Alonso jumping into another bed on the subject of cheating scandals, the orange rats, you know, Massey and witness protection, and now Palou. We need to come up with a legal show, a legal drama, The Good Wife or something. He's trying to do something, but it's you know, it's cook worthy, and he'll probably be a feature of this podcast as we go through. Maybe he's getting fame through it. Who knows? It's been an absolute pleasure to be with you, Dens, and to talk through all that. And so what I'll say is, if you are looking at your podcast app and you haven't followed us, if you haven't, please give us a thumbs up, a 5-star, and give us some feedback. Who do you want to hear on the podcast? And we'll deliver. And Georgie will deliver. She is the secret behind this podcast. That's why it's called Georgie's Stripping the Dipping, because she will track down every guest up to and including Lewis Hamilton, and we'll get him on one day. And until then, this will be the sensational F1 Blag. I'm a little bit more bashful than that. I've been joined by Mr. Hammer, the modern day Morgan Freeman himself, AMG Dens, through all sorts of devices tonight. And we leave you with the thought of this. Next time you tune in, you could be listening to FIA Gurley, Brad Philpott, Bryson Sullivan, Wolfpack Performance, Amanda Busick, David, you name it, we got it. Until next time, see you soon. Goodbye.
Peace.